All right. So you'll want to go ahead and hit present because right now we have all the other. There we go. And we'll work with you on this. Don't worry. So we might have to do another run through at some point. So welcome everybody. Hello. We hope you're having a good week. We know things are a little tough today in the state of Oklahoma with current events, but we hope that we can utilize this time with all of you to help you go to the next step in what you're trying to do in your professional career. So we're excited monthly as normal to have both Techlahoma members and technical recruiters here available to assist you. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on what to stop doing right now, because stop doing this if you want to get hired. There's a lot of things, I think, either because you've always been used to doing things a certain way, or in a prior career or job, you did things a certain way, that there may be a few things that someone needs to just say, red flag emoji, right? Because that's the new thing. Stop doing these things. So we have today with us DJ, Zane, and Ashley from Heartwork Staffing. And before we get started, we'll just go through a couple of general Techlahoma announcements. So you can go ahead and hit next slide. So again, Techlahoma's mission is to advance Oklahoma's grassroots technology community. You can learn more about Techlahoma at techlahoma.org. Go to the next slide. And then we want to make sure everyone follows our code of conduct. There's more detailed information at conduct.techlahoma.org. But overall, we want to make sure everyone is providing the dignity and respect that everybody needs in order to learn through our Techlahoma community. So basically, be nice to one another, help each other out. The more we can help out our tech community here in the state, just the greater the opportunities will be for jobs and opportunities for growth and advancement here in the state without feeling the need to leave. If you are not from Oklahoma and joining us, though, you could come and work for us here, right? All right, next slide. And then also with Techlahoma, everybody is included. We want to make sure that whether you're just getting into the tech field or you've been an expert or anywhere in between, maybe you're a business that wants to support the technology industry growth, or you're somebody who has maybe taught people about technology, that you're all a part of this Techlahoma organization. Next slide. And then ways that you can get involved, we have our Meetup user group. So we have groups that are meeting both in person and virtually still right now, whether that's a language that you code in or you're into hardware development. I believe our Hardware Oklahoma City group last week had a swap meet of technology. So that was a pretty cool event that took place. Also Slack, we're going to encourage all of you to join our Techlahoma Slack, and we'll put that in our Twitch chat. Join us there at our hashtag jobs-webinar channel so that we can have a more detailed conversation. If there's anything that you want reviewed, whether that's your resume or a cover letter, or you have questions, Slack just allows us to stay a little bit more engaged beyond just this live Twitch presentation. And we also have conferences and workshops, networking events, and so much more. So find out more information at techlahoma.org. We are a nonprofit, so if you're shopping for this holiday season, consider selecting Techlahoma as your Amazon Smile charity that you can help to support. And a couple, cents here and there with all those Amazon purchases will go to just building up our community throughout the whole state of Oklahoma. All right, and now we'll get started with today's presentation from our amazing friends at Heartwork Staffing. We've loved that over this past year, we've been able to work with Heartwork on having these webinars because they are really in the trenches of hiring. They talk to the hiring managers, they talk to those of you looking for jobs, they talk to different businesses. So we've enjoyed having them a part of these chats every month because they can give you some real world experience as to what's taking place and things to do and not do. So I will hand it over to DJ first. Is that right?
Yep.
All right.
Hello, everyone. I'm DJ Winters. I'm an IT recruiter with Heartwork Staffing. I've been in recruiting for a little over 14 years now, all of that in healthcare and IT, pretty much an even split between the two. And I've been at Hartwig for about a year, but I have known our owner, Rebecca Hartwig, for a little over 10 years now. And I'll let Ashley and Zane introduce themselves as well.
Hello, I'm Ashley Farram. I've been with Hartwig staffing for 2 years now. Similar background to DJ, actually. So healthcare and tech recruiting. And I've been doing it for about 7 years.
I'm Zane Schwab. I've got a very different background than these two. I've been with Hartwig since May of this year, and previously before that, I was in IT infrastructure and leadership for 10 years before that. So enjoying my time with these guys.
So as we've discussed previously, today we're going to be talking about stop doing this if you want to get hired. First thing is, in my opinion, probably the most important of the topics we're going to discuss today is stop expecting a cookie cutter approach to the process. And starting with specifically one thing is just using one resume and not customizing it to the type of position that you're applying to. I definitely don't have any qualms with and would actually advise sort of having a master copy, so to speak, and maybe it's several pages in length that has like every detail of your career and skills and education and experience, projects, accomplishments, all that stuff. And you could maybe use it as sort of a library, so to speak, so that when you do go to apply to a specific role or position, you can kind of pick and choose the different things that may apply specifically to the position that you're interested in pursuing and applying to. So that'll help you sort of customize your resume and or application, if that is a part of the process, to that role and to that company and the culture of the organization, the skill sets they're looking for, any insight that you may have on the role specifically that you're looking at in front of you. So definitely, keep in mind that when you are considering applying to a specific role or company, that you want to really consider your background, skills, and experience, and how it applies to the specific job description that you are looking at, and the company and the culture of the organization, the people that work there. So you might research a bit about the company and the people that work there, and we'll come to that point a little bit later and elaborate on that more. But that'll help you customize your resume and application to that role specifically and highlight your skills and experience as it would directly relate to what they're looking for, as opposed to, a very generic or general explanation of your experience and background for that particular position. Also, don't expect all companies to interview the same way. There's a very common misconception, in my opinion, that most companies have the same interview process and the same approach to interviewing and retaining talent within their organizations. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Just about every organization has a different approach to interviewing, and more specifically, the hiring managers within those organizations are quite different one from the next on how they interview candidates, how they evaluate candidates in their presentation and the responses they give to questions and the questions that they ask in the interview process. So, keep in mind that the individual or individuals that you are interviewing with are going to have different perceptions, even those in the same room, on your responses to questions, your presentation, your body language, your tone. And so that is very important going into the job search process, and more specifically the interviews, is noting mentally that not every company has the same approach to interviewing and recruiting talent for their organization. Kind of goes hand in hand with what we talked about previously too, about customizing resumes for the position that you're interested in pursuing, or that dream job that you're wanting to have. Consider the fact that years of experience is applicable to most companies, but more importantly is the accomplishments that you've had throughout your career, or maybe you're just getting started in your career, and so accomplishments may be more from your time in college, or maybe it was a coding dojo that you went to, or a boot camp. So think about years of experience versus accomplishments. And typically speaking, the distinction is years of experience may meet a certain requirement or preference for being considered for a role, but accomplishments is the thing that's going to get you the interview and ultimately get you a potential job offer. Being able to convey those in a resume and then speak to those in an interview. Those are the things that speak value to organizations, whereas years of experience is really just kind of, almost, I hesitate saying almost a minimum requirement, but it's really kind of the first line, so to speak. And those accomplishments are really what kind of sets you apart from the crowd and the pool of talent that they're reviewing for the interview. And then when you're going through the interview process, how you convey those points and speak to those accomplishments even further separates you from your competition in that process. Size and scope of the work. One of the things that I have ran into several times in my career, both personally and working with other candidates in the tech industry, is kind of thinking along the lines of, well, I've done that type of work, I could do this job, whereas in fact the employer's looking at it more from a perspective of we have a team of 60 and you came from a team of 3, or the projects you're working on may have been $10,000-$20,000 budget, and the projects we work on are several $1,000,000. So there's a vast difference in the type of talent and skills needed to be successful from one environment to the next. So consider the type of role that you're going to be applying to and how you can translate that to that particular role or environment. Searching and applying the same way. A lot of times people will just kind of look at one resource, such as Indeed. That's their primary resource for looking for positions and applying for positions, and don't consider any other resources that are available to them to find that dream opportunity that we all want to find in our careers or retain. Consider the fact that outside of the 2 popular platforms of Indeed and LinkedIn, there is the possibility that the less and less popular platform, such as like Facebook, that's more of like your personal social media, not so much considered the professional social media platform, but it could be a way, if you're one that maybe checks it once a week or something, maybe you want to start checking it once a day, because there are times where someone might mention, hey, got this great opportunity with this great company, and they're talking about the company, and it piques your interest, and you think, man, I'd love to work there. I want to learn more about it. And then you reach out to that person and spark up a conversation, learn more about the company and the different teams that they have. And maybe that even facilitates them introducing you to a hiring manager that happens to have an opportunity or is thinking about hiring for a position that would be your dream job. Just one example of, kind of thinking a little bit outside the box of mainstream traffic, so to speak, in that process. Applying the same way, finding a job is not just about submitting your resume or submitting an application as just the one and only way. Having conversations with individuals that, we've talked before in past Techlahoma talks about networking and the importance of that. Very applicable here too. Very similar to the example I just gave about, seeing something on Facebook with a common connection, but networking events could, lead to a potential job opportunity. I think I mentioned this in one of our more recent Techlahoma talks that I've been working with a candidate personally that was looking for a position and had identified what that person felt like was the dream opportunity, the dream company, and wasn't a fit for the initial role that they applied to, but just so happened that this person attended a networking event that other individuals from that company were there and met that person, impressed with, her presentation, communication, and I'm not sure if they talked about skill sets, but ultimately got invited back to interview for a separate role and recently accepted an offer from that company. So there is a lot of power in networking for many reasons, but considering that when you're thinking from the perspective of searching for and applying to positions in the same way that you've always done, expand those horizons and think outside the box as much as possible. Along with that, expand your network and leverage it. Again, we've talked about ways to do that in the past, but there, aside from attending different meetup groups or networking events, you can expand your network by, just researching on LinkedIn, for example. I know, again, this is something I've talked about before is, researching companies and who works there, but even more specifically, maybe I haven't mentioned this, but finding those common connections of, maybe you identify a team within that company that piqued your interest and you see that the hiring manager is connected to someone really well. So leveraging that network to, further expand upon and add more to your network and learn more about the individuals that work there, or maybe ultimately have a conversation with those individuals and learn about the culture of the organization and what they look for, and the culture of the team and what they look for, will greatly increase your potential for ultimately landing the ideal opportunity or the dream job that you're looking for. Zane, Ashley, anyone listening in right now have any thoughts, ideas, suggestions along the lines of, what we're discussing here with expecting a cookie cutter approach?
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple of topics here. The resume customization, I know it sounds grueling, kind of overwhelming to have to go update and customize your resume every time you're applying to a new role. So just look at it as, have that main version of your resume, but make sure you're paying attention to job descriptions. You may have a skill set that's not listed on your resume, but it's listed on the job description. So make sure you're adding those things as you're applying to roles, or, if you're applying to positions that are different titles and slightly different skill sets, but you would qualify for both. Well, you need to have two versions. You need to have a business analyst version and a project management version, or different things along those lines. And then just touching on years of experience versus accomplishments. And, you can have 20 years of experience and you were working on more maintenance-esque projects. And then you could have 5 years of experience and you're working on greenfield projects, you're doing IT modernization, things along those lines, which it's just a little more in-depth experience. So as DJ said, I just wanted to reiterate how important it is to make sure you're speaking to the accomplishments that you have, those projects you've worked on, and really get in depth, and don't assume that someone would know.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then one last thing, as far as customizing your resume, we see a lot of resumes that are, 4, 5, 6, 9 pages long sometimes. And so just want to encourage everybody, if you can, keep it to a couple of pages max, and you can even put a note on there if you need to, says, have a more comprehensive resume available if you'd like to see it, upon request or something. But just keep in mind, these hiring managers are likely reviewing a lot of resumes, a lot of individuals for these roles. And so, try to keep it concise, because there's a good chance if they see a really long one, they're just not going to have the time to go through it, line by line. So keep it short when you can.
Good point. And that, just to circle back to one of the first things I said, maybe you do have a resume that is several pages long. Again, kind of use that as sort of a library, so to speak, of an exhaustive list of all your skills and experience. But, take from that or pare it down as you go to apply to positions, and really narrow it down to the main points of your background and skills, and how it translates to what you perceive that company to be looking for based on the job description or whatever information you've been able to come up with from your research. Thanks, Ashley and Zane. The other thing you definitely want to stop doing is not being engaged in the process. And we're going to go through some points here that kind of further defines what engagement looks like in that process. Kind of touched a little bit on it in the first slide of, don't want to just go day to day, just sending out applications and same old application, no research behind it. Just, oh, this looks good, we're going to send an application. Be more engaged in that process. And one of the things that you really want to start with before you ever even really start sending out applications is really think about and define what you are looking for from the type of schedule. Do you want remote, or would you prefer it to be hybrid, or would you prefer to be in the office every day? What type of culture are you looking for? Think back on past positions that you've worked in. What did you like about the culture of that organization? What did you like about the people that worked there? What made it such a great place to work for you? And maybe it was something that was completely outside the career field you're in now, but it's still there were things that you liked about it that you can apply to the culture of an organization within the career path that you want to be on right now. So think about those things. Think about the skills that you want to develop and how that's going to help you advance your career. Does this employer or this team, offer you the opportunity to strengthen or develop new skills through on-the-job learning or training, or do they offer, some type of incentive? Like a lot of companies these days will pay for you to go to training or conferences so that you can learn new skills or strengthen existing skills. So look at those things as you're defining, what you're looking for. And obviously, the one thing we all think about is the comp package, the salary, the benefits. Define that, every bit of it, not just the salary, but what are you looking for in a benefits package? What's most important to you? Maybe it's just the health insurance. Maybe you don't need health insurance. Maybe most important to you is retirement benefits or time off, with your family. Or maybe you just want to have time off so you can travel throughout the year because you still have the ability to do so or have the desire to do so. So you need, a certain amount of time off to be able to do that and accomplish those personal tasks or dreams. Once you've done that, think about what you're willing to flex on, prioritize those things. And it literally is helpful to write down, here's what I'm going to define that I'm looking for, and then prioritize. What am I willing to flex on? Maybe ideally you want 100% remote position, but if somebody offered you a hybrid schedule, you'd be just as happy with that given other factors were met of what you're looking for. Or maybe it would be, most important to me is retirement benefits and least important is paid time off. So think about those things that you're willing to flex on. And again, write them down, prioritize them so that you reflect on that whenever you not only go to apply for a position, but maybe you are considering an offer or multiple offers. In the market we're in today, it is very common to eventually end up with more than one offer. So really consider those things and what you're willing to flex on. What are your main priorities, and define those things. And that'll help you kind of set a parameter or a framework to operate within as you go to seek out opportunities, interview for opportunities, and consider potential offers from employers that you're looking at. Make a daily goal of, I want to send out X amount of applications on a daily basis. And try to hold to that on a week-to-week basis. And what I mean is there may be days where you only hit a certain number and it's not quite the goal that you hope for, or maybe the opposite. Maybe you hit way over that goal, because sometimes it's a lot shorter process. Maybe it is just as simple as sending a resume to an employer. But there are a lot of situations where you have to fill out a very lengthy application or provide a bunch of references, or maybe they want to have you do some type of technical assessment before you ever even interview anywhere. So it takes up a little bit more time than what just sending a resume to someone would. So, consider those things. And that's why I say kind of evaluate on a week-to-week basis what you're averaging on a day-to-day basis. But set a goal of daily applications and really strive to hit that goal. Do your research on the companies that you are possibly considering or very interested in coming to work for. Not only about what they do, but yes, definitely consider what they do, the products and services they offer, but dig deeper. LinkedIn again is a great tool for looking at who works there. What are their backgrounds like? Where did they come from? What all companies have they worked for in the past that have given them the skills and experience needed to ultimately land them an opportunity with the company that you want to work for or may be interested in working for. Look at the history of the organization. How did they come about? How have they grown and changed over the years? And what direction did they seem to be going as a company? Does that seem to align with the career path or trajectory that you want to be on? We have one client that comes to mind for me, somewhat similar to what we're talking about here, that a decades old company that had historically been tied to legacy systems, and in the last several years here have really made a huge effort to bring about a digital modernization. And it all, a lot of that began with a change at leadership at one point several years ago. And in the last few years here, it's really changed the culture of the organization in a very positive way. So look at the history of the organization and how they came about, how they've grown and changed over time, and where they seem to be going as a company, and the type of people that they've attracted over the years and that they now attract into the organization. And what is their reputation like? There's lots of resources and tools out there online to help us kind of get a picture for people that work there now, people that worked there in the past. You have places like Glassdoor that give you reviews. Now, of course, I would highly recommend, kind of take those things with a grain of salt, because, and more often than not, as we know about reviews, it's not just Glassdoor, but even Amazon reviews or, Google reviews. More often than not, people that take the time to write reviews are just because they had a negative experience. Now you'll see a lot of positive as well, and more people are doing that. But point is it gives you sort of an idea of, what is the reputation of the company like? Do they provide a good, solid product or service? Do they have happy employees? Do they provide professional development and growth? Are they a growing, stable company? All those things are things to consider when you're researching the reputation of an organization. Don't turn down interviews. Maybe you've prioritized, what you're looking for, or define what you're looking for, and you prioritize your, 1 to 10, what are most important to you. And maybe it's even, you've wrote a list of companies like this is my number 1 company, and then the number 2, number 3, and now number 6 or 7 company comes in and wants to interview you. Well, don't turn down the opportunity to interview with a company just because it's maybe not the top of your list, or maybe the opportunity doesn't on the surface sound like it's the dream job, or maybe it doesn't appear to be the team that you'd hoped you'd be a part of. There are several things that you can gain from going to an interview, even if on the surface it doesn't appear to be your dream job. One of those being is, it helps you build your confidence as you continue to go through the process of searching for other positions. Helps you learn more about, how to present yourself, how to communicate in an interview, what to expect or anticipate in interviews. Yes, not every interview is the same, as I noted earlier in the conversation, but you will notice there are some commonalities from one place to the next, and you may see that there are some things that you can prepare you for future conversations. Or maybe it's that you make an impression on that potential hiring manager, or it's a panel of hiring managers, and one of them really takes note of your skills and presentation, and they happen to have an opportunity on their team. And so now they're going to invite you back to interview for a role that would be, kind of at the top of your priority list. And ultimately, it could land you your dream job. Real world example, had a candidate I'd worked with earlier in this year that had unexpectedly been laid off from a position and was interviewing for an opportunity with Amazon, and got to the final interview, didn't get that position, but someone along the way took note of that candidate's skill set, presentation, abilities, whatever it was. I don't know specifically what it was. And that candidate ended up getting called back and offered the opportunity to interview for a completely different role within the company. So, keep all those things in mind when being offered the opportunity to interview somewhere. There are many different things that can come from that are positives, even if it ultimately ends up not being the job you're interviewing for being your dream job. And then follow up after interviews. A good example would be maybe you interview with company A today, and then 4 or 5 days from now, company B calls you and wants you to interview with them. And it's, very much appreciated and respected of candidates to then turn around and notify company A that, hey, just want to keep you in the loop of where I'm at in my process and my job search. I remain very interested in the company, the position, whatever it may be. But I do have, other companies that are now starting to invite me to interviews as well. Still available, still interested, whatever the case may be. But follow up. Maybe you haven't heard from that company a little bit, and it gives you an opportunity to touch base with them, let them know where you're at, and maybe elicit some feedback from that company on where they're at in the process. Also, the same thing too applies to if you're working with a recruiter. A lot of times we are working with multiple different individuals and multiple different skill levels, backgrounds, and it's, we have candidates that are, contacting us fairly frequently, doing the same thing, kind of keeping us updated on their status and where they're at in the job search process and what has transpired since we last spoke. It kind of keeps those individuals at the forefront of our mind whenever new opportunities do arise. And same thing for those companies that you've interviewed with, those hiring managers. You kind of stay at the forefront of their mind as they're continuing to interview other candidates before they, make decisions on who they're going to move forward. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts they want to share or ask about right now? Zane, Ashley?
So something I wanted to touch on, that first bullet point, define what you're looking for, and just talking about today's market and how different it is than it was, even just months ago. Something that I think all three of us have experienced recently is a lot of people that we're talking to, they end up with multiple offers. And so being able to define what you're looking for ahead of time, whether that be a benefits package and a good company culture, whether that's just that you're looking for more money or, whatever it is. And kind of getting ahead of that and prioritizing, here are my, top 3 or 4 things that I want, and here's what's most important, and kind of rank them. That will really help you, especially if you do end up with multiple offers. DJ, we always joke around in our office. He's so good at helping people really think through that process of, just because you get an offer from one company for $125,000 and you get an offer from another company for $115,000, it doesn't necessarily mean that the $125,000 offer is the better offer for you. Look at your priorities. Look at, do they offer a bonus structure? Do they have really good benefits? Are they going to check all of those other boxes in the long run? And I'm not saying that $10,000 isn't a lot of money, but, in the long run, when it comes to accepting a position. $10,000 is not always a lot of money. So just something I wanted to kind of touch on there. And then I also, the turning down interviews topic, I thought was really, it's just something that's interesting. Definitely not to encourage someone to just go take interviews and waste a bunch of people's time or anything like that. But, if there is a role that you're kind of questioning and it maybe doesn't seem like the perfect match, still go on that interview, meet with those people. Like DJ said, you're getting in front of people, you're getting practice interviewing. You never know who you're going to meet throughout that process. You never know if they're going to make a really good impression on you and you walk out of that interview thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I went. I'm so impressed with this company. They're working on projects that I didn't realize that they would be working on. A lot of different things can come of it. And we see so frequently a company interview one of our candidates and maybe not necessarily think they're a fit for the particular role that they interviewed for, but somebody is in that interview who really liked them and has a fit for them on their team. So just touching on those again.
I'm going to use a quick example. Thanks, Ashley. That made me think of something too, along the lines of really defining what you're looking for, and in the specific example that Ashley mentioned of maybe having multiple offers. Completely separate scenario. Again, a previous candidate that had gotten laid off unexpectedly on a Monday, talked to that candidate on a Tuesday, and just knew from the skill set that they had that it was very likely that they were going to start getting offers within about a week, maybe 2 tops. And so in my initial conversation with that candidate, we talked about that, hey, you really want to kind of start mentally preparing for the floodgates are about to open on you. I know you're still processing the unexpected loss of a job, but what's going to happen when you have 3 offers in front of you, or you have multiple interviews that you have to go on all of a sudden, and you really haven't even fully processed losing the job, let alone, what it is that you're now going to be looking for. And sure enough, by Friday that week, Monday to Friday, that candidate had 3 different offers. And even though we had been talking along the way and trying to kind of mentally prepare for that, neither of us expected it to happen that quickly. And so again, it was an entire week of just brain and emotion overload of, a lot of information to process. So to that point of what Ashley just said and what I mentioned before, all the more important of why you really want to define what it is you're looking for and how that's going to help you grow professionally and achieve the goals that you want to achieve, whether personally and professionally.
We have somebody joining us via Twitch who mentioned that they're a veteran and they're interested in the idea of moving into tech, and they'd read InfoSec and it seems like the field for them. So we're thanking you all for having this discussion today. I think the other thing to consider is with the slide that you just presented, DJ, if you are a veteran, some of this may be completely foreign to you because of the fact that you were always put into your next duty assignment, and maybe you had the option to talk to somebody about where you might PCS or where you might go, but it wasn't necessarily up to you. So I think veterans or people who are changing career paths or industries, I think this is a great slide to remind you that maybe what you were used to doing or what you didn't know you had to do, there's a lot more engagement involved is what you're really saying, all of you, with this information. And the worst thing you can do is just hope and assume the right thing will fall into your lap. And the more that you can be a part of the process or talk to people, Kimberly mentioned in the chat that, because of Slack, she had a variety of people look at her resumes and give her input and share some feedback. And so I think in the days of applying for jobs on your own, silently, with shame possibly, there's now this kind of ability to say, how can everyone help me with this process? And the meeting the people, as you mentioned, Ashley, the value in that, and maybe it's interviewing to get into an organization and maybe not have the perfect job, but are there more opportunities if you're an internal candidate versus an external candidate? But if you're considering all the stuff that you listed there at the top, that at least opens you up to saying it's worth this move if I have to do 2 or 3 years of maybe what I don't want to do to get where I want to be because I'm developing further skills or I'm changing my career path. I've seen a couple of people do that from going from being a business focused individual at a business, honing in their tech skills and development and software skills. And then all of a sudden now they're positioned in the current business to go into a role that makes more sense for what they want to do next.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point.
Yes. Very, very good point, and appreciate the thoughts there. And specifically to your point about veterans, it's interesting because right now, one of my lifelong friends is transitioning out of the military, and so I've been kind of, helping talk through that transition and some things to consider, and one of those points being exactly what you just said, Kristen, about in the military. It's kind of just you're kind of told this is what you're going to do, this is where you're going to go. You have a little bit of input, but transitioning to finding a career path in the private sector can be a little daunting, and it has been for him. And so I've been trying to help with that as much as I can, and kind of talk through some of these points here of what to consider when you're making that transition. Third thing we want to stop doing is not preparing for interviews. Again, a lot of these things may be common knowledge for some of us and maybe not so much for others. And that's why we're kind of going through all these things. And then we're talking, more specifically about some points to consider on each individual topic. Number one thing, preparing for an interview, it probably most of us know, but I emphasize probably, maybe not, is what will you wear? Consider that before you go into an interview, and digging deeper into that thought, think about the type of organization that you're interviewing for, and more specifically the team that you're going to be interviewing with. Maybe it's more of just to use an example, and I use this because I've actually had clients from this type of background and then tell us to specifically tell candidates just come in t-shirt and jeans. But manufacturing background, I remember years ago working with Kicker in Stillwater, and had a candidate interview with them for a technical role. And the hiring manager specifically told us, when setting up the interview with the candidate, just tell them to come in t-shirt and jeans. And so we conveyed that back to the candidate. Maybe sometimes you don't get that information, so you might want to consider that. Ultimately, always err on the side of caution. It's always better to overdress than underdress. Biggest point to consider here. As a part of interviewing for that interview process, you want to kind of consider the type of questions that you might be asked. Again, with the wealth of information available to us, not just online, but if you do have a pretty well established network, you might kind of work with your close circle of friends, family contacts, and understand what their experience has been on typical interview questions that might be asked, and how to prepare for those, prepare some responses, but also prepare your own questions for the interview. What do you want to find out, and how do you want to ask those questions? One of my favorite questions to ask whenever I've personally interviewed over the years, and share with candidates to consider what they might want to ask, is tell me about the culture of your organization, or how would you define the culture of your organization or your team? Organizational culture and the team culture might vary a little bit, or it might vary drastically. And there's lots of insight you can gain from that, aside from just the description given to you. You can pick up on what the culture's like, whether positive or negative, just by the tone of how people respond to that question, their body language that they respond to that question with. Those are just a few examples that come to mind right off. But consider anticipating the type of questions you're going to be asked, and kind of mentally prepare for how you'd respond to those questions. And then for sure, have certain questions that you want answered in the interview process, and be prepared to listen, because maybe in that interview process, they'll answer those questions without you even asking. But be sure, that you kind of have that list of questions that you want addressed in every interview you go into. And that way, if you are not given information that answers that question, you can ask and find out. Consider whether it's going to be an on-site interview in person or if it will be virtual. More often than not these days, especially if you're interviewing for a technical position, but I think in general across the board, it's probably the same. We're going to be doing more virtual interviews. And so, I mentioned here being on time, that applies to both of them, on-site or virtual. Kind of the old adage is be ready 5 minutes before the interview, maybe 10 minutes before the interview. So you want to, considering it may more often than not be virtual, be ready, be prepared, and be ready to go a few minutes before the interview is actually supposed to start. As a part of that preparation, consider the location of where you are going to be sitting while you're interviewing virtually. Definitely don't want to be somewhere where there's a bunch of, unprofessional things in the background, or maybe it's just a little bit too busy or distracting from the interview process. So there's things you can do, such as moving location, or maybe you can blur out the background so it just shows you, or maybe you put just a generic background behind you. There's lots of different things you can do to improve the background presentation, but consider those things before you go into an interview. Make sure it's a nice, quiet space, where there's little to no distractions while you're on that call from a noise perspective. Earlier today, I was talking with my team and kind of talking about that point specifically and where I was sitting at the time. And even right now, there's a door behind me. I want to make sure at least I can lock that door if maybe I'm interviewing from home or something, so that I don't have, if you have a family, you have little ones that run in while you're in the middle of an interview. So consider all those things. Test your technology before the interview. This is a very important one. We've all three of us and have had this issue arise at one point or another this year, where we've had candidates a few minutes before or a few minutes into an interview contact us saying they can't get Zoom to work, or for some reason their camera on their computer is not working. So test it all out. You can use friends, family, and send them a Zoom invite, a LinkedIn invite, a Google Meet, whatever platform you're using. Most likely you can set an invite and test it out on your end before you actually use the link for your actual interview. And then think about how much time you're going to have in the interview and how many people are going to be involved in that interview. Is it a 30-minute interview with just one person or multiple people? Is it going to be a 2-hour interview with just one person or multiple people? And consider, when you respond to questions, given the amount of time and the amount of people in the interview, most importantly, regardless of how much time you have or how many people are in that interview, try to be concise. One piece of advice that I always give candidates going into an interview is be as concise as possible, almost to the point where you may feel like you're being a little vague, but always follow up with, I can elaborate more if you would like. I just want to be respectful of our time here today. So consider how much time you're going to have, how many people are involved, what interview questions that you've brought to the interview, and how you're going to respond to their questions without taking up everyone's time and not covering everything that everyone involved in the interview would want to cover or talk about that day. And then finally, take time between interviews so that you keep rested and you're still sharp going into it. Pardon me. We've had situations recently, Zane specifically had mentioned that he's had a candidate recently that had 3 interviews in one day, and 2 of those interviews were 2 hours long back to back. So by the time that candidate came to the 3rd interview, they just weren't feeling near as sharp as they normally would in that situation. So if at all possible, try to keep it to 1, maybe 2 interviews a day. And even more importantly, try to space them out. If you have to do 3 interviews in one day, try to space them out. Last thing you want to do is do back-to-back interviews if at all possible. Try to keep from having to do that, but definitely don't forego the opportunity to interview completely if that's the last choice. Before I move on, any comments, any questions that anybody wants to share or discuss?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on, having questions prepared. I mean, these hiring managers, employers, they really want to see that you're engaged in the process, which is kind of the whole point of, DJ's talk here is, being engaged and active. So, come with more than just a couple of questions to that interview. Come with 5 or 6 or more. And, being a hiring manager previously, like one of the most disappointing things I know I could experience when talking with the candidate is if you ask them, do you have questions? And if their response is, no, I'm good, that you kind of, I want to see that they're engaged and invested in the process and are curious and, have a lot that they want to know. So definitely have plenty prepared there. And then on the topic of, testing your tech, if you do end up having problems, I mean, obviously stuff can happen, regardless of how much you test or try to prepare. Last time I was on here, I had lots of audio issues and, I wasn't prepared for that. So, I would just say if you're trying to get a hold of the hiring manager or who you're interviewing with, if you're having issues, reach out as soon as possible, whether it's reaching out to your recruiter, reaching out to who you're supposed to be talking with, and just let them know. Don't, spend a bunch of time up front trying to fix it and waiting 5-10 minutes and then reaching out. I would just say, let them know right away. Say, hey, I'm having trouble. I'm working on it. Maybe can we have a phone call instead, or, see what options there are. But I would just say, don't wait too long to start that communication about any issues you may be having.
Yeah, and to that point, that kind of goes back to, being early for an interview, even if it is virtual. It helps if you try to join maybe 5-10 minutes early. That way, if you do realize you're having issues, either you can get ahead of them and get them resolved before the interview actually starts, or you're able to call the hiring manager, in an appropriate amount of time.
And one last thing I just thought of as Ashley and Zane were kind of sharing their perspective as well is, and this kind of ties back to what I mentioned earlier about researching the company and tying into what Zane said about come prepared with, more than just a couple of questions, but, really understand as much as you can about the company, what they do, and the products and services they offer as much as you can, and if there's any information you can get about the culture of the organization, etc. Reason I say that is I have a specific example where I had a candidate that went into an interview, very first interview, and it was just intended to be a 30-minute conversational interview with the hiring manager. But one of the questions the hiring manager asks every single candidate is, what do you know about our company? And that candidate basically responded with, well, not very much. I got kind of lazy and didn't do any research. I mean, pretty much into the interview process right there. I mean, I think they still talked to him, but, again, that's part of being engaged and preparing for the interview, being engaged in the process and preparing for interviews. So just another example to consider.
So I just wanted to mention, we're in the last 5 minutes of our webinar. So if you do have any questions, make sure you throw them into our Slack #jobs-webinar channel, or put them in Twitch so that we can be prepared to answer those at the end.
And I'll be able to move through this last one a little bit quicker. So final point here is, stop not balancing pride with humility. So yes, when you go into interviews, you definitely want to, talk yourself up and your skills and your experience, but also keep a certain level of humility throughout that process, and be humble, and respectful to the fact that, you are on someone else's time as well as your own time. And you may have multiple people in the room as well to consider in your responses. So first point is learn to sell your strengths, and think about statistical value versus abstract value. For me, statistical value is more of like, you're going to discuss points in your resume or in the interview about where, something you did save the company time, money, or increase revenue. Your abstract value is going to be more along the lines of like your soft skills and your presentation, empathetic, compassionate, emotional IQ, basically. So consider those things. Where are your strengths and weaknesses when it comes to statistical value and abstract value? Identify your weaknesses, conquer them, and sell them. Be honest. Take a critical assessment of yourself and be real honest with yourself of what your weaknesses are. Give examples of how you've overcome or conquered those weaknesses, and sell that to the potential employer. Part of that is seeking and accepting constructive criticism. Look at your close circle of friends and family members, or current or past supervisors or coworkers, and think about the type of criticism that you've been given, whether it was very helpful to you or not. One example I can think of is I read an article on LinkedIn recently about a gentleman that had interviewed at all these different companies and kept getting feedback that, too entrepreneurial. Rather than letting that beat him down and make excuses for that's a generic response, he really started to self-reflect and say, okay, that's some good feedback. I'm going to start my own company. And the end result of it was that he has an established company that generates like 7 figures revenue or income for him. So seek and accept that constructive criticism, whether it's through the interview process or from your circle of friends or current colleagues or coworkers. Know your value and set those expectations accordingly. Do your research on the market. What market do you live in? What's the cost of living like? What are the value of the skill sets that you possess? Nowadays with the market the way it is, very much a national market, there's a ton of opportunities out there available, and your value is probably even higher than what you would think it is these days. But do the research, talk with people in the field, recruiters, do your research online and see what information you can find that will help you understand kind of what your value is for organizations and the skill sets you possess. And finally, keep a positive mindset throughout this process as part of being humble, but keeping a sense of pride about you is just staying positive. As you're going and doing the research, as you're applying for positions, maybe not a lot's happening for you, but stay positive throughout that process and keep the course. When you're in the interview, maybe something comes up that makes you think, oh, I don't know, this may not be the best fit for me right now, but don't let that change your attitude in the interview. Maybe there are lots of things that you do like about it, and after you leave there and you really start to weigh the pros and cons, you see that it is a good opportunity for you. So maintain that positivity throughout the process.
Awesome. Well, thank you, DJ. I wanted to ask each of you in a method of wrapping up kind of the year, because we won't be having these until January. Just real quickly, do the 3 of you have any recommendations on podcasts, books, maybe people to follow, influencers, those that could help over the course of the next few months as people start to kind of gear up for the new year? As we know that hiring sometimes slows down a little bit this time of year, so I know it's easy to get frustrated, but any recommendations that you would like to share as people kind of work on preparing for these next steps?
Off the top of my head, I have one person that comes up. He gears primarily towards, I would say, like more junior to mid-level engineer-esque people, but a lot of his content could really apply to a general group. And his name is Jason Humphrey. He's on LinkedIn. He's the first person that pops up if you do a search, typically, because he has a lot of followers. But Jason Humphrey. So it's Humprey.
Zane or DJ, anything come to mind for you?
I'm thinking here, I can't think of anything right off the top of my head. However, I do want to first off ask everyone forgiveness. One thing I forgot to include on the slides here is our contact information. So definitely feel free to reach out to us. You can send me an invite on LinkedIn. My email and phone number is on my profile, so I'm open to contact that way. But my email address is just dj@hartwigstaffing.com. And I'll give some thought to that question and see if there are some things that I could recommend, but nothing comes to mind right off the top of my head just this moment.
Zane, any recommendations? Well, if anything, I'll plug the three of you. If you're not following them on LinkedIn, connect with them. I always encourage everyone, if you send a connection, send a note as to why. So let them know, hey, I saw you on the Techlahoma webinar this week, and I would love to connect. Their team is constantly sharing either job openings, tips, recommendations, stories of people like yourselves going through a transition in job or career, and hope, I think, is what a lot of us are looking for. My example or my option would be, I listened in the last couple months to the audiobook from Brian Tracy, No Excuses. It's a sales focused book, but at the same time, it's a lot of principles of putting yourself out there, working on your goals, determining what you're really wanting to work towards. So with a lot of manageable chapter tasks as to things that you could work on to put yourself out there for whatever steps are next. So thank you all again, Hartwig Staffing team. To everyone, I hope you have a great holiday season and end out the year with a bang. And if you need anything, again, go to our Slack for Techlahoma. Get engaged, as DJ said, with the community. Talk to people, ask for assistance, whether you're still learning, you're wanting to get into tech, or you've been in tech and you also want to learn or give back. I think our community is really important in how we support one another in all of our goals. So thank you, DJ, Ashley, and Zane, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.